Sorry, seriously, can I give you some fucking fruit juice?
All right. Many of us know the details of the billionaire pedophile cabal led by the disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein. Less discussed is the connection artists have with the tragic crimes caused by Epstein and his circle. Flashback to 2019, a student in the Mediated Matter Lab, a creative grad school department at MIT, is sitting across from her professor, Neri Oxman. Neri Oxman is an Israeli artist. She instructs the student to 3D print a giant-sized marble that lit up and told the student to give it to Jeffrey Epstein as a gift, and then basically to just shut up about it. Is it humorous that the rich, hot chick who served in the IDF proved to be a shithead? Yes. Today on the Clear Pill podcast, we're going to have a real sort of come to Jesus moment, a reckoning with the inner ugly workings of the art market and art world, and ask what the fuck is going on. While I, as an artist, have never been asked to make art for Jeffrey Epstein, I've definitely seen many artists shit on one another and leave one another to the dogs. So I'm going to open up the discussion and what do you guys think? Can we make art which is more radical, or is it all leading to a pedophile circle?
Well, I like this kind of like scenario that you put forth at the beginning. I mean, an actual like true anecdote that happened, and I've never personally been asked to make art for Jeffrey Epstein, at least not that I'm aware of. But I think one of the interesting things is like, you know, say I'm in like, I don't know, whenever 2016, and Jeffrey Epstein is offering to like commission a work. I'm not even sure I would like say no. I mean, at that point, he's just like a somewhat disgraced billionaire figure. I'm not aware of the allegations against him. And I think like one of the things in preparing for today's discussion was, sure, there's a lot of like fucking horrid stuff to say about Jeffrey Epstein and like his involvement in laundering his like crimes through high prestige universities and art institutions. But there's a broader context of a lack of public funding or, philanthropy for the arts that doesn't come from really fucking like disgraceful and like, compromised sources. So I think that that's like a big elephant in the room in general, that like there's like dried up sources of funding for people. So it puts everyone in a compromised position with their work and not just being like destitute from it.
Yeah, I think like you kind of highlight the bottom line here, which is that like the arts are incredibly underfunded and have survived thus far, especially, just even museums have survived this far through like private philanthropy, which is like known to be like to have its caveats and to have its catch.
Yeah, it's certainly true that people aren't given enough funding or support in the arts. However, I think that in a lot of ways, this bubble of the art world is really closely tied to corporate money in a way where it has a really toxic relationship. That shouldn't be the source of funding for artists.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, but I think it also goes like under-examined within like the insular art world. It's never really like spoken about explicitly. I think one of like Anna Khachiyan's like early articles, I think maybe before Red Scare, really highlighted this kind of implicit problem in writing about how the art world won't save us. And one of the things that she highlights in that piece is how these performative and like symbolic gestures of dissent and resistance amongst like the Trump administration are becoming increasingly hollow and increasingly a distraction from the structural like ways in which the art market functions, and are making people feel that these symbolic gestures are even more kind of shady and fucking like, you know, just don't have any actual like value or content to them, and, you know, are a relic from a time when such a thing was viewed as provocative and like breaking the norm or something. But now it's like Trump is really the, or at least he was the face of that kind of libidinal provocation, and like nothing can really top it, especially coming from equally as compromised sources as like the traditional art world, like capital compromised like figures, I guess.
In theory, the transgressive art that's coming in the pipeline, be it out of the mainstream media or from this artistic elite, its objective is to create a spectacle. You know, they're like public firework displays with the hopes that it'll entice you to get angry or become informed about a particular topic. I guess to my mind, perhaps where this has worked best is in groups like the Russian collective Wena, or from Pussy Riot, and at worst looks like fucking Kathy Griffin's decapitated Trump head, you know, the Guggenheim toilet or the baby Trump balloon. And I think another part of the problem is that, you know, this art is obviously just cringe and juvenile, you know, starved of all originality, but also that it focuses on just individuals like Trump or Bush, with, you know, the Rock Against Bush album, getting all our dads together in some like pastiche posturing towards the 70s or something, rather than attacking institutions and practices. Or, you know, as Anna Kachian says, you know, over time, stunts like these only play into the hands of Trump's populist messaging, you know, that elites care more about symbolic progress than they do about meaningful reform.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's art that is failing at being transgressive and trying. And then there's also art that's actually trying to be deceiving, which I think is, you know, an issue that the story of the Israeli professor sort of points to add a little bit more context about how an artist could be supporting someone like Jeffrey Epstein, is that the Media Lab itself actually had a whole department that was about the ethics of what their studies were and about art. And that idea of ethics was something which all the professors were constantly saying, you know, I'm not sure if we're doing the most ethical thing, but we're going to continue to say we are. So I think that that sort of reveal was really illuminating for me to see that, you know, I don't know, it might seem obvious, but that there's so many structural things and things happening that make it okay to be completely like unethical.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what I was like thinking about when it came to this discussion came back to the idea of legitimation, like the idea that academia and the art world are like places that big tech and finance go to like achieve like, you know, a laundering of their crimes. And sometimes they do so in like the most like in your face ways by like supporting the like kind of pseudo, like most pseudo radical you know, artwork that's like the most kind of extreme or something. I mean, I'm reminded of like some of the you know, particular pieces that were found inside Jeffrey Epstein's like apartment. I think one was called like War Games, where you have like a painting of George W. Bush like flying a paper airplane like around the Oval Office, which with a bunch of like crumbling like little like Legos in front of him or something. Which like, I mean, it's clearly like a commentary on like the fucking like, you know, like war crimes of the Iraq War and and 9/11, and you know, for Jeffrey Epstein to buy that is just like a giant, like, I mean, it's almost like a turns him into a Joker type figure. Like he's just
yeah,
so,
I mean
like,
that's
twisted,
the artistic
you know?
statement in and of itself. I mean, did you read about the photorealistic prison scene that included barbed wire, correction officers, a guard station, and Mr. Epstein portrayed right in the middle of it?
Yeah,
like he has
yeah.
a picture of it. It's like, holy fuck, that is insane.
Yeah, like this motherfucker just knew exactly what was going on.
Exactly what was gonna happen.
Yeah.
And then you have these artists sort of just having their work collected by these people and after the fact denouncing the work itself in order to appear like non-complicit, which is just completely an absurd idea in the first place, to denounce something as if it like were a child. Like
Right.
this is not my bastard child.
Right.
And that's a statement.
Yeah, like the movement of like people who had like pieces in their collection that like were by the same like artist as those in like Ivanka Trump's collection, and like they all in mass like sold the artwork to like have the value like plummet, which is just like such an insane way to like take a stand against like
Yeah.
fucking contemporary oligarchy to like, you know,
Yeah.
fucking like, you know, plummet the value of like one artist's work in order to diminish like 1/10 of Ivanka Trump's net worth or something, or probably like 1/100th, like just infinitesimally like another just hollow gesture.
I mean, these are inter-class conflicts. This is petite bourgeois against just big bourgeois. I mean, this isn't like working class transgressive art. You know, this is just like rich art handlers who have like socially liberal policies, like fighting against like this fucking Cheeto man, you know?
Yeah. There is some very uneven power dynamics happening, certainly, where these artists, like as we mentioned earlier, aren't getting funding, and they're in a very sort of like neoliberalized position in the market, right? Where they have to like hire on unpaid interns in order to make their work. I mean, that's just the fucking norm in the art world.
Yeah. Or just an anecdote that I shared, you know, in a previous episode with you guys was with the Sheldon Adelson thing, where it was like I was working with these people who required money from the Adelson family. You know, like that is how they were able to make their productions that were for good causes, but they had to do it in the dirtiest way possible, precisely because like there is no funding. Like they tried to get grants, they tried to go down the road of doing that, but it's incredibly difficult.
Yeah, I think that another big question that looms over like a lot of this discussion of, you know, Jeffrey Epstein in particular, and then like the art world and academia in general, is a question of autonomy and like the idea that, you know, people make choices in undesirable, you know, circumstances. And like, no one's saying that like it's easy to like go it alone and, you know, try to find like discrete funding sources that aren't compromised. And in some cases, you know, if you like do have to take money from big tech or finance or Jeffrey Epstein, like, you know, I don't say that like carte blanche, that's like a fucking like, you know, horrible thing to do if you're redistributing it in like, you know, good ways. What I'm really like surprised at, especially reading the article from like a year ago in The Intercept about the MIT Media Lab and the influence of big tech and also Jeffrey Epstein on that institution, is the like lack of awareness that like the goals of this media lab that are ostensibly on trying to think about the ethical development of artificial intelligence, the idea that those principles could be diametrically opposed to like the funding sources. And if you're going to take the fucking money, you have to be extremely like clear and like aware that that is a pernicious force that's going to dictate the direction of your research and its implementation. So you have to,
totally.
if you're going to do that, like, and like, you know, more power to you if you can like suck a little bit of capital out of these people, you have to be fucking savvy about how you're going to, you know, subvert their influence. And it seems like it at multiple times, you know, and I think in this case, there were actually, you know, some version of like working people. There were like very junior academics and like kind of precarious like research assistants who were seeing how their research onto artificial intelligence was being used to fucking like legitimate like surveillance through facial recognition, the use of like predictive models in policing that have like very like disastrous consequences. And it was all under this like rubric of like, well, we consulted the experts and we like understood principles of like fairness and anti-bias in like this technology. And so, yeah, I just think that there needs to be a lot like less of a like single condemnation of like Epstein or individual people, and like an understanding that like there are forces at play with different interests, and you have to be fucking strategic if you're gonna make something good with that money.
Yeah, for all that these universities preach about sort of inclusion, about learning, about ethics, and about becoming a good citizen, it's all a fucking sham. It's just a sham.
Well,
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess perhaps a question to explore that you raised, Issa, is like how against like I guess the mainstream like market artists, like can art be transgressive, and what is some good examples of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the ideas that Anna Kotchian brings up is like the idea of populism and like the art world being kind of at odds with each other right now, and that is like a fucking problem, you know? So, and like how to fucking square that circle. And, you know, I mean, a couple artists come to mind, like shout out to Brad Tromel and Joshua Citrella, who like both kind of make art about contemporary online culture with a focus on like viral memes and like political spaces on like social media, and like kind of do genealogies of like how that is like evolving with like an emphasis on radicalization and like pathways of like memes becoming more or less popular. And I do think that like there should be, I mean, maybe it's like corny and passe at this point to even say this, but I do think that like that is like populist art right now. And I think that like ignoring it or chalking it up to say like, oh well, only like alt-right people like do like Pepe or something, and like we shouldn't be interested in it because like it's like just from the cusp, like gonna corrupt you into like down a pathway of radicalization, is like the wrong way to go. We have to take like that shit seriously and like critique it like honestly, you know, or like adopt it or transgress it or something. I don't know if you guys have any other shout outs.
I think that there's a lot of people actually doing like organizing like on the fucking streets too, who I think should be shouted out. I think those people are making a lot of progress just in terms of like having an actual more populist state and more of a socialist government. Yeah, I mean, one of the artists who I really liked is the AIDS activist Felix Gonzalez Torres, who's since died, but he's someone who I've always really admired. And I think that those people are, those artists are fucking there. They're definitely there. But it's not on the onus necessarily on the individual to change the entire system is a little bit the issue here, I think, where it's a question of how do we simultaneously hold the people who have acted really shittily, like fucking Neri Oxman, how do we hold them accountable for that while also saying, you know, we all exist in this system which forces us to do things which are, you know, not forgivable in a lot of ways. Do you all know any artists now who are working outside of like social media or tech? Like, I'm not sure if I could think of anyone who goes full Unabomber out.
I mean, I can only speak to the world of cinema under Trump. You know, there has been a proliferation of transgressive art that's referential to the 60s.
Oh yeah, big
Like,
time, big
look
time.
at the way Marvel has exploded under Trump, and shows like The Boys, American Gods, Watchmen, that all have a certain and transparent political affect that mirrors the political theater of the present. And this is like a multi-billion-dollar industry and contributes to what Mark Fisher highlighted, I think, in Capitalist Realism, that the bad guys aren't fought in the real life anymore. Like, revolution and struggle have been relegated to the screen. You know, and some exceptions to the rule might be shows like Nathan For You, which I harp about a lot, because here you have a show that's on cable television mocking the themes of reality and cable television and exposing the absurdity of capitalism, you know, the inherent intelligence and gusto of the entrepreneur, how gullible the consumer is, and the asinine nature of like our everyday rituals. And Ali G is definitely on this train too, you know, exposing how bullshit politicians are. All Gas No Brakes is another good one. And all these artists, you know, through their hooliganism are creating sort of transgressive politics without being explicitly political.
I think that those are sort of the people who are definitely, you don't get that sense of what did Jerry Salt say? He said something about the elite bohemia of the art world. And I would definitely say that those are people who, you know, speak to an audience that is the everyday person, that are on platforms that are super accessible. You know, they're just really important figures in this landscape of the art world, which has so many gatekeepers, which is so difficult to access. I think that the gallery space, I mean, this is sort of now it's becoming a cliche conversation about the issue of the white cube or the gallery being sort of like white elite space. But that is definitely has some truth to it.
Oh yeah,
definitely. I mean, I feel like also like it remains to be seen exactly what the Trump moment like meant or means in terms of like the continued threat of the far right, you know? But I think some people have jumped the gun in terms of thinking that like they're embracing this pessimism that is almost, you know, reminiscent of like the Frankfurt School or something that, you know, really in the wake of World War II and a lot of these like really famous like left-wing social theorists like Horkheimer and Adorno and Marcuse, they like immigrate to like the United States and they're consumed with the idea that the working class chose fascism over communism in the, you know, rise of the Third Reich and the end of the Weimar Republic. And I think like their kind of philosophy is, you know, kind of about skepticism of mass culture and consumer culture, and rightfully so. But I think that, you know, maybe the art world in the age of Trump, learning from that experience and thinking that we're reliving those same times, has, you know, turned its back on like any sort of like populist messaging. And I think that like the problem is that you can't really like seed that ground, you know. You have to like appeal to people like where they're at. And I think examples like Nathan For You and All Gas No Brakes are definitely, you know, a good site, even though that I don't think those are like fully fleshed out political statements per se. I do think they hint towards like a positive mass culture that's like, you know, at the same time that it can sometimes be like humorous or like fucking pointing fun at people. I think it's also like kind of profoundly like humanizing thing, just like, you know, displaying things for how they are to an extent.
Oh yeah. Hennessy
and I think
Youngman.
I think that's the big thing
so
about
good.
talking about people are
I love
nihilistic
Tennessee
about
Youngman.
Hennessy Youngman, where the fuck did he go?
Yeah, he kind of fell off the map, dude.
Well, people are nihilistic about politics, and nobody wants to like participate in politics. And I think that's sort of like the value of comedy and these sort of like hooliganism and these sort of like Ali G sort of characters is like it's a way for the vast majority of people who are incredibly nihilistic about politics and nihilistic about the possibility of things to change. While I don't think it's like, I think art can have has dual potential in the form of being transgressive, where it can either criticize or it can show like possibilities for like potentialities for the world, where I think like a lot of art in the example of like Nathan For You or Ali G is like criticizing and poking fun. It's not fleshed out in so much as it doesn't like, it's not art as showing us the potential or the possibility of like a socialist world. But I think it still has a lot of value because people are so nihilistic that this is a way for them to participate in a political discourse easily.
Yeah, I agree with you. I wonder though, like thinking about like the work of Angela Nagel and Kill All Normies, whether this like pranksterish, like postmodern kind of strategy of poking fun and like being provocative is like, the correct strategy of like a
totally.
new left or something.
No, I think it's a good.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, I'm not sure
I think
what
it's a good
an
point.
alternative could be, because I'm not sure that anyone is necessarily like into a fucking like, solemn, sincere, like lecture or like, statement, artistically or otherwise. But I also don't know if like what's the terrain in which like you can confront,
I do think that sort of is the correct strategy. And here's why I think it's the correct strategy. I mean, I think because the idea of a pranksterish persona can be sort of reframed, right? Where it could be, this is someone who is aware of the position that they're in, and they have a self-reflexivity enough to sort of not take themselves too seriously, is how I think about like Nathan For You and Hennessy Youngman. And I think that's really important because it like eliminates your ability to do something. I mean, I on its face, like to do something like give money to Jeffrey Epstein, or else it's not even funny anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's like about like picking the right fucking targets, I guess.
Yeah.
Is a good point.
Yeah.
Then it can be effective.
Well, I think just like the whole spectacle of dumb Starbucks like created so much discourse and like rhetoric just about the insanity of capitalism, the possibility of just like creating like mock spaces purely by like bending the law,
Yeah, and I mean, it's not even like, it's, barely like that fiction is, I mean, it's not even fiction. It's just like reality. He actually
it's just
fucking
reality.
did that with
like, all these things,
that's
and it was
corporate
and it was completely
consultantship.
legal. Yeah, and I mean, like this is just the practice that most people do. Just the ludicrous fucking things that people are willing to do to get their businesses going or their fucking houses remodeled.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I think
that would be funny if Nathan For You went like full like extreme and did an episode where he was taking money from like Bill Clinton or a pedophile or something. And
well, there's the episode with Uber where he starts like a sleeper cell that is basically he gets cab drivers to join Uber, but then they're the worst fucking drivers. Like they smoke cigarettes and like play music really loud. And his whole intention was to like shut down Uber. And it like generated all of this like sensationalist media about like just what the fuck is going on with Uber drivers, and nobody had any idea that it was this big spectacle that was being created. But like he actually did momentarily like hurt Uber, and it was for like no fucking reason at all. I mean, I agree on the one hand, it's not, I think there's merit to like just as like monkey wrenching the fucking factory machines wasn't going to bring down capitalism, like hooligan fucking acts like aren't going to bring down capitalism, but like just as monkey wrenching was a valuable tool at the time, I think like this is a tool that should be pursued for artists rather than fucking like putting up a fucking 16 karat fucking golden toilet at the Guggenheim, you know? It's like, I think there's so much more value in like the kind of work that Ali G does for like the average person than like denying the fucking Trump administration of Van Gogh. You know, it's just, it's so, yeah, I don't know. It's just bullshit.
Yeah,
It's so
I mean,
just, yeah.
I think there's also like an important like space to preserve for that hooliganism of even like online like trolling and like brigading.
Yeah.
Like, you know, it's, you know, oftentimes like purely associated with like malicious intent or something, but sometimes the target of that shit has been like inspiring. And I think that,
Yeah.
you know, there's a tendency to feel like the space for that is being forever like encircled and kind of like closed down as, you know, the kind of technological advancements are increasingly monopolized by the likes of Microsoft and Google and Facebook. And I remember like always thinking that like, yeah, as like fucking technology increases, it's like ever more important to have like good laws on like the book, because like the effectiveness of like laws is like completely kind of proportionate to their ability to be like enforced. And the number of times that I've like broken laws by like drinking like in like a public park or something, like imagine if that was like, you know, actually like enforced with facial recognition. Like that would be like one of the last like solaces of like freedom that would be wrenched from me. Like, no, thank you. I mean, there's obviously bigger fish to fry in terms of injustice, but just like as an anecdote.
Yeah, totally. I mean, as tech relates to the art world, I think a response to this that I've seen is I actually read a really interesting research study, and the study was testing what an AI thought of an artwork in a museum. So the AI
cool.
sees a Duchamp like fucking urinal, right? And then it responds like porcelain, it's a toilet. Like it's just a toilet. And it shows like, you know, without any context, that's what art basically is. It just is like what you see right in front of you. And I think that that's a perspective. That whole study just kind of shows how sort of fucked up and insider that I think the art world is, right? Where you need to have all this context in order to understand, and that there's so many different ways to access it.
Well, I also feel like that points in a different direction, though, that like it points to like the fundamental like irreducibility of like human creativity or something, because I feel like the Dada movement and like Duchamp and stuff like were like important, and the idea that like a fucking AI can't like read that as like having this like deeper context is like actually extremely like instructive as to the like ultimate like, you know, fungibility and like probably like really dangerous and like dystopian fungibility of these technologies not to read nuance. And like there's like reference to this in the idea of sentencing based on like predictive models, where like a AI used in like pre-sentencing motions can like, you know, basically recommend for like an extension in like years for, you know, a convict or like a defendant, but like, you know, there's so much additional information to be gleaned from like a jury trial and like the intervention of a human, whether it be like the judge or something, who can like see that like a person has like a certain like past that's not reducible to their like past like incarceration time. And it's just like completely fucked up to think that like algorithms and data are going to replace like philosophy and like ethics and like clear these like past like debates around whether it's like criminal justice or anything. Like it's such a poor substitute, you know?
You don't
I
think
was
pure
just trying to
reason
point
can
to
solve
an
all our
instance
problems?
where technology can be used by someone to actually do something good, and that is critiquing the systems of power.
Right.
Yeah.
No,
Well,
I guess, that's a good point the other way, that like, yeah, I mean, there is all of this like entrenched like insider knowledge that like is necessary to like glean meaning from like an artwork, and like that's fucking like problematic to begin with.
Yeah. There's a cool exhibition that I saw a few years back. I think it was in New York, and what it was is that it was trying to connect in real time surveillance to like the AI behind it. So you as basically like you'd walk into a room and there were cameras above you that were like tracking your movement, and then they would project your footsteps like as you walked through the room, so you could see like tracings of your steps, but then you could see in real time projected on the screens like how the algorithms were working. So trying to connect what is invisible about surveillance to like the act of surveillance, and to like the act of just like moving and going about your everyday. Like, to me, that's really fucking cool. Like, that's good art. That's transgressive art that like exposes something that's purposefully hidden from individuals.
No, I have an example of that too. Like, I worked with this like social scientist once upon a time who used virtual reality to bring people to like field sites where he was like exploring like extreme like environmental like degradation, like the burning of these like palm fields in like Indonesia, I think it was, that like reduces an insane amount of like carbon monoxide and like other like dangerous gases or something, and like being like jettisoned into this portal via this technology definitely brings someone a kind of like tactile, I mean, it's virtual, but it gives them like a different sense of like being there and like understanding that. And like in the same way that you talk about like surveillance, bringing that to life through the same tools that are used to instantiate it is like, I think, a really interesting direction for future work.
Yeah, especially public artwork, which I think is the thing that a lot of people, especially now that we're all at home and fucking on our computers and shit, like that we're missing out on this great potential right now of just like public art, public exhibitions, public things that not only criticize society, but I think ultimately something that we're also missing a lot is like not only criticism, but like I think what people want right now, especially because everyone is so nihilistic, is like, what is the way out? Like, give me art that like shows the potential of a new world, you know? Like,
No, I was gonna mention that. Like, it was like, I like the work of this artist named like James Bridle, who like did a piece, like I think it was like maybe like 5-10 years ago, about like drone shadows, where he would like, I think like make like shadows of like a predator drone in like Western cities, like over like above their head, to like give people like the same experience of like, you know, what people in like the Middle East and, you know, other places in the world, I mean, like, they're fucking drones flown over like, you know, Western cities now for real. And like inspire that sense of like paranoia and fear and like terror. But it's like, ultimately it's like, you know, the people who have that shit like flown under them, like, it's not like they have a direction out besides like, you know, forms of, you know, resistance that to this point have not proved incredibly effective. So yeah, I mean, I think it's asking maybe like too much of like artistic work to like point us in a given direction, but I also feel that fatigue with like, just knowing like the problems and like having them like laid bare can oftentimes be like more of a burden than it is like liberating, I guess, you know?
Yeah, because I mean, I guess just on kind of like a side anecdote is like, I think the limits of like offering new models in the space of art can be like readily experienced in like the history of EDM and house music, which was the original idea was to create these spaces and these dance cultures in which like sexuality was liberated, everything was liberated, like these were autonomous zones where people were free. And like, just look at the way that like EDM has been completely fucking co-opted. You know, it's like that is the thing that is selling all the top hits these days, you know. So there's definitely limits in that.
It's almost like this sort of co-option of these artistic movements, underground movements, it almost moves beyond the sort of nightmare that Mark Fisher outlines in his work, where it's not just the fact that it's repeating itself and becoming co-opted. I think it's also this idea, I mean, maybe this wraps into his argument really perfectly, but just this idea that it would be funding like a pedophile ring or something that's so, laundering for a pedophile ring. It's just so beyond the pale that it's even worse than I think we could have imagined. And that's where it's really like hard to talk about it, because it goes beyond the issue of people not having enough funding and therefore turning to these harsh places, because it's like actually just a question of like human decency at its very core.
Like basic like humanity, like some like semblance of like common fucking solidarity that you can aspire to. And it's like they're literally like running like a global pedophile ring, and like everyone knows about it, and like no one can do anything. I mean, sorry, I'm starting to sound like Q. I disavow Q.
You're starting to sound like Ariel Pink, dude. There is a cabal, and the Clintons are running it.
Yeah, but it is true. I mean, like, I think that so much of like the Epstein story kind of like or Trump as a figure, like it kind of like works to obscure the like basic day-to-day inner workings of like academia or the art world, where it's like this is all funded by like oligarchs and arms dealers and foundations that like have extremely dubious political and economic incentives to encourage work and research. And I think that that's the true like problem. It's not necessarily these like flash in the pan Bond villains. It's actually just the like inner workings of like you're not going to be able to trust Apple and Amazon and Goldman Sachs to police themselves. You're never going to create a piece of artwork or like a body of research that convinces them to act differently, not pursue like the profit motive. You have to do that through like basically like government regulation, political organizing, movements from below, and like you have to work within institutions that have like a different logic, and you have to like marshal power that has like a different genesis or like source of its influence.
You have to actually just bug your art with a small camera to listen to all the rich people as it circulates throughout the market. And I think that might be the actual solution.
If fucking Banksy did that instead of making his art like whatever, like explode or like burn like he does now, maybe I could get back on board.
Mickey Mouse dressed up as Mr. Monopoly or something.
Well, that's when that's
cringe.
when it gets like dark. It's like people feel like that, like despair, and now like there's this whole like aesthetic around like cottagecore, where it's like young people interested in like aesthetics, literally like adopting the like Kandinsky, industrial society and its discontents or whatever it is. That kind of extremism, which is definitely not the route that I would advocate. But until there's like not something that's so compromised as the traditional art world, until there's like an alternative space, it's very predictable that such fatalistic and nihilistic movements will continue to proliferate.
And we just have to, easier said than done, we have to make what is outside of the so-called normative art world, what is outside of it, not obsolete, but we have to figure out a way to make that like more fucking real and visible.
Yeah. The problem is,
I completely agree.
I mean, don't you feel like the problem is fucking all artists are like backstabbing motherfuckers. Like everybody's at each other's throat and like trying to climb into that like mainstream niche fucking petty bourgeois circle of things. Like there's just, I feel like at the bottom of things like a pretty toxic art culture, especially. I don't know. I mean, I never participated in it at the university level, but like from like a removed degree, just witnessed a lot of this shit of just this like social climbing bullshit and these like endless art critiques and like people giving commentary about each other's art and whatnot. To like that I feel like it's almost ingrained at this point that like art is competitive, and that's a part of the problem. I guess just as like an anecdote, you know, for a long time, the Soviet Union, what they would do to encourage art was just like they had these giant warehouses where if you were like an artist and you wanted to make some art, like you could just go and get the shit to do it. You know, like that's what I think like a community driven arts program should look like. You know, it's just like we provide the resources for free. Like you have a movie that you want to go make, here's the fucking camera, here's all the gear to go fucking do it. You know, like that to me is the sort of like programs that we need to be advocating for, is just like community control of the resources, and anybody who wants to do it can go and do it.
Yeah, that I completely agree with you. And that points, I think one of the things you mentioned that I think is really important too is this idea of like actually just coming together, because I feel like there are so many people having this conversation just in tandem with each other, like just parallel, and there's not many places for people to like meet together because of the nature of the like meeting places as they are, where I'm not going to go to some gallery space in Brooklyn. I mean, I don't know, maybe there's one of like my friend or something. No offense, but I'm just, you know, to be honest, I'm just not interested in it. I'm not interested in the world. You know, I don't want to be scouted by Eckhouse Lotta, like. Fuck that.
yeah, totally. And like, this like ever like increasing enclosure of public space is definitely like, you know, making that kind of thing harder. I do think that there's like a possibility through like crowdfunding platforms to like actually, you know, achieve some like level of autonomy for your work. I mean, not that has like, it's kind of redistribution from like maybe lower segments.
The bottom to the bottom.
From the bottom to the bottom. Exactly. I mean,
that's interesting that you mentioned the crowdsourcing platform.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think like some of the most interesting like art being like created today is like some of the like, you know, podcasts or whatever that like have kind of like grown audiences based on like organic, like voluntary like contributions or something. Mm-hmm. I did also want to mention
GoFundMe has been corrupted though.
Well, GoFundMe, I think
GoFundMe has gotten weird.
Well, GoFundMe is weird. I mean, like, there's a bunch of duplicitous shit on there too. It's like fucking. I think there were like people during like the Portland protests, like right wingers setting up like fake like GoFundMes to like support like the protests. Fake riot ribs.
Fake riot ribs.
Yeah. I mean, I also think it's like worth mentioning that like there's been a couple like really viral like TikToks that have like been like for some reason it's like always like women who are like saying like, oh, here's something I don't like understand, and it's like, why can't we just like print more money like if we like are out of money or something? And it's like tons of people like responding to them, like always like these guys who like just took like Econ 101 who are like, oh, it's gonna create like inflation and like devalue our entire like fucking currency. But I mean, I would like to like speak to those people like directly and just like tell them to Google like quantitative easing and like understand that that's literally what we have right now.
We
like,
have always been doing for like
we like
50 years.
Like
wait,
you know,
what the fuck is that?
Quantitative easing is like a fucking like thing that like the like feds do, which is like, you know, basically just like buy like treasury notes and like government bonds and like increase like the supply of money. I mean, it's basically what we did
China
after
has been doing.
It's basically what we did after like 2008, like after the mortgage crisis. There was like a massive amount of like corporate debt, so we had to like bail out the banks for like insuring all these bad like mortgages, and
But
we
we
basically
also didn't
turned
have the money to do that.
yeah. So we turned basically like this like private debt into public debt, and like increased like the government debt into trillions, and then all of a sudden that is what like sparked like the Tea Party and all of these like economic like, you know, conservative people to say we didn't have money for like social programs, when it's like, well, we had money for the fucking like banks, so like we definitely have money to fund like public art and like public space, and you know, there's no actual like hardcore physical limits to this shit. It's just a matter of like will and power and like influence that like, you know, the equation can be changed, I guess.
Yeah. And the extent of the will and influence is a fucking 16 karat fucking toilet. That's the best we have to offer, folks. That and a fucking baby Trump balloon.
Okay.
That's art today. I don't know. Yeah. Fuck, nay.
Yeah.
It's a bummer.
That is crazy. I mean, God, on GoFundMe, I saw last week, this just blew my mind. Andre Leon Talley, who was Anna Wintour's like right-hand man through Vogue, everything, just at all the fashion shows, big in the fashion world. There's some fucking crazy story. Someone put up a GoFundMe for him asking for $500,000 because he hadn't been paying rent to Manolo Blahnik. Like, I guess he had some mansion in some city, hadn't been, like, he had a weird negotiation with this homie, Manolo Blahnik, and then they were like, yeah, you owe us $500,000, and now they're crowdsourcing that much money for this dude's mansion? What the hell is going on?
No, I think that's so funny, given that like it was recently revealed that like, you know, I think something like 80% of GoFundMe is just like crowdsourcing people's like medical bills, because we don't have like a functioning healthcare system in this world. So it's like, I broke my fucking arm and it cost $50,000. So like, please like save me. And then meanwhile, it's like tangentially, there's like these like fashion like elites who are like, I got kicked out of my mansion, people help. And it's like, oh yeah, here you go, dude. Like, can't let you like live in like a normal 1 bedroom and like, you know, Bed-Stuy that would cost like, you know, still an insane amount of fucking money.
Yeah, there's like a photo of him on this GoFundMe just wearing this like huge red puffer coat that's just clearly like Gucci or some like avant-garde designer. It's like,
I
dude,
mean,
just sell that.
Can't ask him
like,
to part from his like Balenciaga, you know, that would be like a bridge too far.
just this like dysphoria of being like super wealthy, leading you to making a GoFundMe as if you're just the everyday person. It's crazy. So how is we're coming to the end here of time. How is of the podcast? How's Texas looking?
What is up with Texas? Did they finally get out of this?
Yeah, I mean, Texas, it looks like they have power back now. Like, thank God.
My only eye into Texas is fucking the Joe Rogan Experience.
That's the only eye I need, dude.
Our rival.
What's that? Was that your third eye, dude? Did you
Yeah.
smoke so much weed your third eye opened all the way?
I finally realized Joe Rogan is the most radical opinion in the world. It was so awful. Like a couple months ago, I was hanging out with these old punk rockin' dudes, you know, and they were just like, yeah, Joe Rogan is the man. He's the most radical opinion out there. I was like, oh God. He's like, everything he says is true. And I'm just like, oh.
Yeah, I don't know. I go back and forth on Rogan because it's like, on the one hand, like, I think it was always like a meme to like shit on Joe Rogan because like the dude is like just, you know, constantly like amazed by like every like contradictory thing that he hears. Like one second he'll have someone like on like discussing how like racism isn't real. He'd be like, oh my god, dude, you brought these statistics that blew my mind. And then like the next second, like I saw him the other day like interviewing one of my like favorite rappers, like Freddie Gibbs, and they're just like chopping it up about like fucking like slanging like cocaine, and like Joe Rogan's like, yeah dude, like the sentencing differences between crack and like meth and like coke, that's like really fucking racist, dude. Like we need to change that. And it's like my man just has no like consistency. Like he's just like he's just like a kind of like, you know,
he's the ultimate edgelord is what he is.
Yeah, he's like,
it's pretty awesome. I just hate how he's like, he went from being like mostly like comedic to now like having this wise man affect on his show, and it's fucking obnoxious to me. Like he just like he's a fucking Aristotle or something. It's like,
dude, don't say that shit, man. I'm trying to get on the pod. I'm trying to go to the experience in the red tube he's got.
You need to do a lot more drugs if you want to get on the Joe Rogan experience.
Right,
he only lets like full-time shroomers and stoners on.
I know. I haven't like been
do
able
DMT
to secure
like 20 times. You need
you
to
have to secure a
Martians.
bathtub of DMT to be able to like be granted access to that like weird red like blob that he like podcasts out of now. Yeah.
I love how everybody was on the topic of Texas though. Like I love how like everybody rips on Ted Cruz for like bailing ship, but like that's what the wealthy and the fucking powerful have done literally in every single fucking crisis. Like whenever there's an invasion or anything, like what do you expect the wealthy and powerful to do? Like, you expect them to actually, like, live up to their fucking rhetoric? Like, no, all these people are gonna bail to fucking Cancun in a heartbeat.
Yeah, that's what's, like, so pitiful about it. It's like, what, if he stayed, would that have been, like, better? It doesn't matter. It literally doesn't matter. Like, it's not, like, a gotcha that he left. It's, like, doing exactly what you would expect him to do.
Yeah,
like,
it's just,
the problem is never, like, where are rich people when the shit goes down? Okay, maybe they die in the, like, you know, ice storm, or maybe they're in Cancun. That doesn't change the fact that they like privatized the entire energy grid and didn't weatherproof it for the most predictable weather event.
Yeah.
Like, you know, the polar vortexes have been getting like further and further south for a long time. They literally had like a government sponsored policy recommendation that said you had to like fucking weatherproof these like wind turbines and like natural gas facilities for sub-zero temperatures, like they do in like tons of other states. Like Alaska has functioning wind turbines. Like, so yeah, you know, I'm sick of these like scandals of like, you know, I mean, it's fucking funny. It is fucking funny, but it cannot be confused with like the actual like issues at hand, which is that like these people don't do their fucking job. What they do is like protect their like interests and like pad their fucking wallets, you know.
On that note.
Yeah. On that note, like, we're out. We hit our contractually obligated 1 hour, so, you know.
Peace out.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Peace out.
Fuck y'all.